This RealAg Radio podcast is brought to you by Barricade 2 herbicide from FMC. Barricade 2 herbicide destroys tough broadleaf weeds like narrow-leaved hawksbeard, cleavers, night flowering catchfly, and kochia without compromising the safety of your cereal crop. Barricade 2 herbicide. Tough on weeds, gentle on crops.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Monday edition of the show. Hey, thanks so much for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. Also, big shout out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast. It is great to be back here on this Monday edition of the show. Hopefully you had yourself a great weekend. Got lots done, maybe relaxed a little bit. We're into the third week of March, everybody. Hoo boy, here we are. Okay, planting and seeding, getting very, very close. We're getting some snow this week in southern Alberta, which is much applauded, Mother Nature. Thank you very much. We'll take it. Means spring gets pushed back. Oh, that's okay. We need some of that spring moisture. So I know everybody has different conditions where you are. Some people are feeling a lot like spring, really, really beautiful temps. Some people feeling like, it's still a little chilly. We're kind of all over the place, very variable. Last week in Saskatchewan, when I was in Saskatoon on Thursday, Friday, I heard a lot of mixed conditions. I asked producers at the Cargill event I was at, hey, how's your moisture situation? It was all over the map, depending on where people are. So definitely you can't broad brush it whatsoever. Well, hey, today on Agronomic Monday, Peter Repeat Johnson will be here. I have no clue where he is this week. He has been all over Canada and the U.S., so looking forward to hearing from Pete today. We've also got Laura Schmidt from Manitoba Pulse and Soybean Growers, going to talk about the decision planting soybeans before canola, and we'll also have some time today for the top ag news stories of the day. Now, if you have any feedback, some thoughts, some commentary, some questions, a burr under your saddle. Oh, hey, I heard about this. What about it? We want to hear from you. You could send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find us across all the different social media platforms. You name one, we're there. And the other option is to call the RealAg feedback line. Now, that number is 855-776-6147. A couple things, speaking of feedback, I want your feedback on this story. Real Agriculture on Thursday broke the story that the federal government is backing away. They're backing off their funding of 4-H Canada. Now, there's a number of things happening here. This has been a story that we've been aware of for a while and sort of been trying to gather more information on it. We went public with it on Thursday. And there's 7 staff cuts, a significant staff cut. This 4-H Canada is not an organization that's like 500 employees, so 7-person staff cut, significant. What does it mean for programming? We'll have to see. The organization is definitely diving into what some further private partnerships could look like. Basically, at the end of the day, the federal government not quite sure under the application that 4-H Canada made if it aligned with some of the priorities of AAFC and the programs that they had applied under. Pretty negative reaction over the weekend from you, the audience. The question is, is this something where farm organizations are going to have to step up? Is this something where, government's not going to fund it as much? So, hey, crop protection companies, livestock company, basically the industry, it's time for you to step up for 4-H. This is a real interesting one. And what's kind of perplexed me since I first heard about this, we're not talking about like crazy amount of dollars and where the government spends their money. You had to be able to find a pot of money somewhere where you could make 4-H a priority. It's a head scratcher for me. It really is. Why go through the negative press that this would create. Because here's the thing. And we use that line, it's about the kids. It's about the kids. And it's not just rural. 4-H clubs are becoming more and more popular in urban centers. And at a time where we're really wondering, and this government talks about the youth and the need for a youth movement in the industry of agriculture. What if I was to say, what's an organization in this country that focuses on youth? Who would you come up with? I don't know. Some of you may say, well, there'd be a few that would say Ag in the Classroom, for sure, and a great program, by the way. I think a high majority are coming up with 4-H. 4-H. I don't know why the government made the decision to take the PR hit on this one. Makes no sense to me. It's a head scratcher. I want your thoughts on the decision. And after that, I also want to hear from you what needs to happen next. Okay? You can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Also up now is a new poll on realagriculture.com. And the poll this week has a little bit to do about trade. We found out from some Real Agri Studies data last week that 52% of you believe that trade and market access has somewhat of a positive impact. Okay? 52%. So either slightly positive or very positive. Now, what I'm interested in is, Lindsay posed a great question here. Which government will secure the best outcome for Canada on a USMCA renegotiation should one happen in 2026? Could choose the Bloc, Liberals, Conservatives. It doesn't matter either way. Canada will do fine. An NDP government. It doesn't matter either way. Canada will lose out. Okay, people are voting like crazy in this one. So I want you to get your vote in. You just go to realagriculture.com on our homepage. Scroll down, you can vote in the poll, and we'll discuss I know that we will discuss the results of this poll on Friday's show in the Real Ag Issues panel. Okay, let's take a break, and when we come back, we got Peter Wheatpea Johnson right after this.
Does your N stabilizer contain an active ingredient load high enough to be agronomically effective? If not, it could be costing you time and money. If you're putting down a nitrogen stabilizer, put your trust in Koch Agronomic Services. Solutions like Super U, Tribune, and Anvil. Each delivers high active ingredient concentrations that low-rate products just can't match. Compare how imitator products stack up to agronomically effective solutions at defendyourn.ca.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is your one-stop shop for everything a canola grower needs. Check out our free video series on YouTube for all the latest in canola agronomy, research, marketing, and more. Don't have time to watch? Download the podcast version of the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com or anywhere you download your podcasts. Stay on top of all things canola with the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
CDC Endure is a new oat line from Alliance Seed. High yielding with excellent disease resistance and the quality end users ask for, all in one great oat variety. CDC Endure provides the high beta-glucan levels to make heart-healthy products like breakfast cereals. For more information on CDC Endure oats, as well as any other products from Alliance Seed, check out allianceseed.com or visit any Alliance Seed authorized retailers.
Okay, let's get going here with Agronomic Monday. But first I want to tell you about the Dirt podcast, featuring down and dirty agronomic science and actionable crop management insights. The Dirt is the place to listen to industry experts break down the latest crop nutrition research and news. It is the podcast that helps farmers make better business decisions through actionable insights. Get ready for Season 3 of The Dirt coming this spring. Okay, Shaun Haney, your host here, and of course, like every Monday, well, at least most Mondays, joined by Peter Wheatpea Johnson. Hey, Pete, how are you doing? How was the weekend?
The weekend was awesome, Shaun. We Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday matinee of Miss Super Test, the Bob Hayward story. So I was on stage all weekend long. It was very cool. We had, some people that were local and part of that history. And for people that don't know that story, Miss Super Test was a world Cup winning hydroplane, won the Cup 3 years in a row, the only time that's ever been done, 1959, 1960, 1961. And then unfortunately the pilot was killed in a boat crash. So we are telling that bit of local history. And that was my weekend. And it's amazing how tired you can be on Monday morning when you've been on stage all weekend long, baby.
Yeah, no kidding. I bet. Well, hey, last week I had a great time in Saskatoon. I was there for a Cargill Market Sense event. Just outside the city. It was a great time, and if you listened to Friday's show, you heard all about it. But it was great. So after supper, I did a keynote, and so then I really got a chance to interact with the growers that were there. It was a lot of fun. And I met a gentleman, I believe, if I remember correctly, his name was Dallas, and he talked about peat. Now, I don't want to pump your tires too much, okay? But he said they've gone from an average wheat yield of 60 bushels to 90 bushels by now. Probably, listen, you're not more powerful than Mother Nature. I'm sure she cooperated. But after incorporating some of your recommendations on practices, they're up to 90. He was like a huge wheat peat fan. So I thought I better give you that shout out. So great job.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. And I'm sure it is mostly Mother Nature. But one thing about it, with wheat, it really responds to management if Mother Nature gives you that little bit of opportunity. And if you don't manage for the opportunity and Mother Nature comes along, you'll still be at 60. But if you can manage for it, and there's some ways you don't have to spend more money, Shaun. There's some ways to kind of be careful along the way so that if Mother Nature doesn't smile on you, you're not out a whole bunch of extra money. But that's way cool. And it's not just me. We've I think between Wheat Pete and Phil Needham and the Yen program here now, if you look at the yields that they are getting on wheat in the Maritimes now versus 4 years ago when they first implemented the Yen program in the Maritimes, the gain is incredible. So yeah. Manage your wheat crop, man. Like it will respond. And I think too many people spent too many years just throwing it in the ground and expecting it to happen, and it ain't that way anymore, baby. You definitely need to manage that crop.
Yeah, and didn't we get an email from Wisconsin where a grower joined the Yen program there because of some of the stuff we've been talking about here on the show?
100%. So Aaron from Wisconsin has been emailing back and forth with me, but he joined the Yen, which is kind of interesting because it's the Great Lakes Yen. Now, Shaun, you know the Great Lakes are Lake Michigan, Lake Superior, Lake Ontario, Lake Erie, right? Like Lake Huron. And that's all Ontario, Michigan, a bit of Ohio, Wisconsin maybe. Man, this year we have people that have entered the Great Lakes Yen, if you can imagine, from Washington State and also from North Carolina and Kentucky. And these are not Great Lakes states, but they're so keen to try to see what the program is about and see how that can help them move the bar forward that, yeah, they're joining it. Hopefully they'll get Yen programs going in their own region once they learn more about it. But it's a very cool thought process. And anytime we can move the bar forward on management and grower economics and yields, Wheat Pete is in.
Now, earlier today, you were with Dave Hooker's class at Ridgetown, and you were talking about drainage. What was the message there?
So, Shaun, the message, it was, the class is kind of a mixed class, so you have to sort of start with the basics, and then you ramp up as you go along and try to help the people that also know quite a bit about drainage understand drainage better. So what's really cool is that one student came up to me after the class and said, you know, Pete, we don't farm tile drain ground. We just kind of haven't gone there yet. But with what you have shown me today and my new understanding around drainage, we have one farm in particular that is just incredibly wet. It's got a drainage ditch along the one end of it. Man, I'm getting a contractor in. We are going to see if we can't drain that farm, because I hate fighting with excess moisture. And so we tried to dispel some of the myths around drainage, like, the myth that you only need to drain the hollows. I know I get this in Western Canada sometimes. Oh, come on, Pete, the surface water all runs to the hollow. Just put the drain in the hollow. Man, you run a drain in the hollow, all you do is you move the wet spot up the hill. It doesn't work that way, because it's not the surface water, it's that drainage water in the soil. And if it's at the top of the hill and it's saturated, it's a long way to the bottom of the hill, and a drain at the bottom of the hill ain't going to help you, baby. And also, we talked a little bit about the unintended consequences of drainage: the phosphorus into Lake Erie, the nitrogen into the Gulf of Mexico, the dead zone there, the phosphorus blooms, and how those are really minor unintended consequences of what we do with production agriculture. And they're real, and we have to fix them. But when you put it in perspective, it helps the students grasp why the negative press that we always hear around tile drainage really are things we didn't think would happen or didn't understand would happen. And when you look at the benefit and the amount that we're losing, wow, they are tiny amounts. And the problem is they're over millions of acres. And when you add those tiny amounts over millions of acres, they become an environmental problem. So we have to fix it. But wow, it's incredibly small amounts that we're trying to correct.
Was there any really, really good questions from the students, or any thoughts that they had that stuck in your head?
Well, Shaun, one of the things that sticks in my head was I challenged them. So we are interacting. We run into Tim Hortons, whatever, we're standing in the lineup, and we hear the person in front of us, say, "Oh, those farmers, they're just they're a big part of the environmental problem, the cattle methane, and like whatever the thing is." What is the first thing you say to that individual? And do you even interact with them? And of course, the answer is you have to interact. If you're an agriculturalist, you cannot stand there and let them continue on with that misconception or with not good scientific information. But trying to give them science is virtually impossible. So, like, what is the first thing you say? And the one comment from one of the students was you just ask them, like, did you eat today? Or are you going to buy something from here to eat? Like, where do you think that comes from? And my answer immediately was, no, don't do it. Because as soon as you say that, they've shut off. You are not going to be able to interact with them at all. And you absolutely have to start with, you're 100% right. We do have some concerns in agriculture. We do have environmental impacts. We know that. And we know that we have to solve those. And once you agree with them and you validate their concerns, now they're listening. And now you can start to take them down the path of, but did you know how small that problem is and what we're doing to fix it and how much more productive we are today, and the fact that there are less people starving today than at any point in history, and that is because we are productive in agriculture. And you can put that story together to move the bar, hopefully a little bit, that person is not so negative on agriculture as they leave the Tim Hortons as they were when they went in.
You know what I'm going to start doing? I'm going to say, I think, I heard what you just said. I think maybe you got some misconceptions, and you know what? I got a guy I want you to call. I'm just going to give him your number. Does that work?
To a point. I mean, I only have so many hours in the day, Shaun, but But no, it's incredibly important. It really is. And if we all do it, if all of agriculture, will stand in the Tim Hortons lineup or, lay on the beach down south and just kind of engage with the people that are not involved with agriculture. You can't blame them for not understanding because they're not in the game. And if I went to an automotive plant, man, I wouldn't know how to run the machines or why they're doing what they're doing because that's not what I'm trained in.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't blame them for that, but we got to engage because we are under the environmental gun 100%. Whether you believe it or not, I don't care. The reality is that the perception is out there, and we have to continue to improve, and we have to engage.
Yeah.
If we don't engage, we end up like Europe, where they take all of our tools away, and the only way to get them back is to go to tractor protests, and I just don't want to go there. I think we can be way better than that.
Well, to give you another example, we're dealing with, obviously, Southern Alberta's got a water issue, right? And there's been a bunch of mainstream news stories about, could be water rationing from an agricultural perspective. Some cities having to maybe do some water rationing way earlier in the season than we're kind of used to. It's impacting the oil and gas industry because they need water, right, to do some of their work. So there's been a lot of stories on it. And I've seen some of the reaction being, well, this is all because of farmers overusing water and things like that, right? Which is not true. That's not. We have a water shortage because it hasn't rained in 5 of the last 6 years in southern Alberta. So it's there's lots of examples that we can allude to for sure. Okay, what you shouldn't do is put that person, the Tim Hortons, in a headlock. Don't do that.
Yeah, that would not be a good. That you might end up in jail then, Shaun.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, don't do that. Okay,
there's the technique, and
yeah, you're right, Pete. You need as easy it is to be quiet and just, oh God, you should have heard what I heard today. It is good to definitely engage. Invita bridges the nitrogen gap all season long, enabling your corn crop to fix the nitrogen it needs from the atmosphere when and where it needs it most. Let Invita set your crop up for success by requesting it from your local retailer. Shaun Haney, Peter Repeat Johnson, and we'll be back here on Agronomic Monday right after this quick break.
Want a product that will give you nitrogen all season long? Then you want to try Invita. Invita gets directly into the cells of the plants, and it's easy to apply, foliar or in furrow. Invita provides the flexibility you need for your farm practices. Whether you want to reduce your nitrogen and maintain yield, or maintain your nitrogen and increase yield, Invita fits your farm. Invita SC formulation is OMRI registered. To learn more about Invita, visit azotic.com. That's AZOTIC.com.
Before you get back in the field this year, spend some time with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Get all the information you need on hybrid selection, planting depth, crop inputs, and more from a wide range of industry experts. A massive library of video content is available on demand when you need it most. Spend your time outside of the field, inside the classroom, with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com.
Peter Johnson at Wheat Pete, RealAgriculture.com, and what an opportunity! Oh my gosh! You think you can't grow better wheat? You are absolutely wrong. We're going to show you how to strive for those record wheat yields that they get in the UK and in New Zealand. You can grow 150 bushel wheat. I'll show you how.
Catch Wheat Pete's Word every Wednesday on RealAgriculture.com or download the podcast on iTunes or Spotify. And we are back here on RealAg Radio on Agronomic Monday. Shaun Haney and Peter Repeat Johnson. Co-op knows your community because, well, we live here too. Our teams are your trusted partners with a range of expertise to help support your entire farm operation. Co-op, here for your farm, here for your family. Learn more at Co-op by going to co-op.crs/farm. Or you can just Google Co-op as well. Like I mentioned, Peter Repeat Johnson is here with me today on this Monday, as per usual. Pete. Oh, hey, last week we talked about phosphorus a little bit. And you've been getting some people mentioning it and asking more questions. And a lot of it has to do with the different forms of phosphorus. What are people asking about?
So there's lots of different questions, but it all comes down to availability. And does it remain available in the soil versus does it get tied up? And it's a really great discussion. And Shaun, we could spend an hour talking about all the intricacies about MAP versus DAP versus, the magnesium bound, the struvites, the the triple superphosphates rather. There's lots of different forms, and it's a really cool discussion because monoammonium phosphate, MAP 1152.0 or 1050.0, depending on the makeup of it, it tends to really reduce pH, whereas DAP, diammonium phosphate, MAP is monoammonium phosphate, DAP is diammonium phosphate. It actually is more basic in the soil rather than acidic. So there's some differences. And people get lost, or not lost, but down this rabbit hole of polyphosphate versus orthophosphate and which is more available or which gets tied up more quickly. And man, it's a great discussion, and there's lots of science there. But at the end of the day, and I think Daniel Kaiser from University of Minnesota just put out a great post back in late October where he talked about some of these things. And as much as we what's the right word, academics, as much as we academics talk about all these little idiosyncrasies of phosphorus and how it works in the soil, but when you actually put it in the soil and you do the trials, man, the soil just seems to buffer enough that phosphorus is phosphorus, and we don't generally see any difference whatsoever in terms of the plant response. And so for most growers, you just buy the phosphorus source that's the cheapest and you drive on. And I know that in some cases, like Crystal Green, they're in the tweet discussion, they say that theirs remains 90% available because they complex it with the magnesium. And I'm fairly sure that must be right. But when I put the MAP in, as long as I band it, it seems to be enough phosphorus there that we don't at least see any yield difference between those two. And that's just an example. When we look at there's tons of other products out there. And the reason I used Crystal Green is because that's what came up in the Twitter discussion. But it's a great product. It just, at the end of the day, it's tougher to see any response out there in the soil or in the field from a crop perspective.
It kind of makes sense because we talk so much about different forms of nitrogen. We don't talk about different forms of phosphorus very much, at least not in my circles. No,
and that's partly because the focus is more on nitrogen, generally speaking, from an environmental standpoint. And from an environmental standpoint, that nitrogen makeup makes a bigger difference. When it comes to in the soil and phosphorus, man, it reacts with calcium, it reacts with aluminum, it reacts with iron. So your basic soil properties become really important. But as John Hurd at Soil Safari John would say, boy, as soon as you ban that phosphorus, then it just doesn't get exposed to nearly as much soil. Some cool work out of Australia that says in their dry soils that it's until the moisture comes, the phosphorus never gets tied up because it's got to get into solution before it can get tied up. So in Alberta, where you've been so dry, it probably takes longer to get tied up because you're just dry. Whereas here in Ontario, we're wet. It's going to get tied up in the soil more quickly, and that band really becomes important to avoid it being tied up. The more soil that granule of phosphorus gets exposed to, the more likely it is that it's going to be tied up by the calcium or the iron or the aluminum in the soil. And yeah, there's so many different reactions. that it's fun stuff, but we don't talk about it because at the end of the day, the science would say that most sources are relatively equal.
Yeah. Oh, I know you wanted to talk about clover and some of the considerations with clover. What do you want to hit on there?
So my great friend Ryan Benjamin's just an awesome agronomist out of Lambton County, and he's one of my stalwarts when it comes to clover. You know that I love clover underseeded into winter wheat under Ontario conditions. When we get a clover stand, there is no better cover crop for the environment, for crop productivity the next year, for nitrogen sequestration for the subsequent corn crop. Like, it is the Cadillac cover crop. The problem is that we often don't get good establishment. Ryan is one of those guys that just has clients who keep doing it and has had reasonably good success, the vast majority of the time. And he's been out there putting it on early, like lots of growers were putting it on, the growers that use clover in February, super warm, super dry. You just say, go give it. And now it's sprouted. And now we've gone from record-breaking warm temperatures before the weekend to back to sub-zero temperatures now and snow. And the clover is germinated, and it's kind of like, is my clover going to die? And the answer is no. Clover is cool. It is incredibly cold tolerant until it hits the first trifoliate stage. And so when it's in that initial germination stage, the cotyledon stage, the unifoliate stage, it will still withstand at least -9 Celsius and perhaps colder than that. So until it hits that first trifoliate, the chances of us killing it here in Ontario are just really slim. Don't worry about the fact. And actually, it looked awesome to me because it's germinated, it's growing. It looks like we've got good stand establishment to date, and that's really important. If we can get lots of plants growing in the early going so that they're a little bit more, have a bigger root system, when the wheat really starts to compete for moisture, they're more likely to survive and make it through and be a good stand when we harvest that wheat crop.
Hey, what do you have on tap this week? Because you have been everywhere as of late. What are you doing this week?
Shaun, I'm speaking several different locations. I'm in Ridgetown today at Dave Hooker's class. Tomorrow is the Grain Farmers of Ontario March Classic, so I'm hoping to get there. Got a lot of other things to do tomorrow as well, but that is the hope. Wednesday, of course, I have the word to do, and I'll be in Guelph with Ontario Soil and Crop doing some strategic planning. I'm their honorary president for 2024. They were kind enough to honor me in that way, and so I'm going to help them with some strategic planning. Thursday, I speak in Lucknow at a meeting there, and we're going to talk wheat, and more wheat. And of course, I'm back on stage Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday when we close out the run for Miss Super Test. So yeah, I'm not out of the province, but I am just pretty busy, Shaun.
You are a little bit busy. Like, no rest for the wicked, as my mom would say.
Exactly. And I am wicked. There's no doubt about that. So no rest for me. I just try to keep up to Shaun Haney. If I can be as busy as Shaun Haney, I think I've graduated. I've made it. No, super, Shaun. Thanks for having me. And yep, have a great rest of your week as well, man.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to talk to you about the new Oxbow cereal broadleaf herbicide from New Farm. Oxbow is powered by Duplasm technology that is a workhorse on resistant kochia and other tough weeds in wheat and barley. Find out more by going to newfarm.ca. That is newfarm.ca. Okay, when we come back on RealAg Radio, we're gonna tap into a recent soybean school episode, and we're gonna talk about planting soybeans before your canola. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
What's next for your fields? At Pioneer, delivering industry-leading genetics drives everything we do. From the scientists in the lab to our local teams with boots on the ground, we are determined to get there first. Developing top-performing products, proven in more growing conditions than ever before. Pioneer. What's next happens here. Visit pioneer.com/Canada to learn more.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by BASF and Syngenta Canada.
Excite your crops with inputs from Excite Bio. Access nitrogen phosphorus with Excite Bio's lineup of inoculants and ag biologicals. Since 2010, they've been helping farmers harness the power of the soil. Learn more at excitebio.ca. That's XITEBIO.ca.
You know, in recent years, we've talked about soybean toughness and the growing reputation the oilseed is earning for its ability to persevere in difficult growing conditions, you know, especially in a tough spring. One of the big topics in eastern growing regions has been whether growers should plant soybeans before corn. In many situations, you know, growers are now giving the nod to soybeans. But what about Western Canada, especially in Manitoba, where canola is king? You know, does it make sense to plant soybeans first? Well, to tackle this topic, I'm joined today by Manitoba Pulse and Soybean Growers Production Specialist, Laura Schmidt. Hi, Laura. Hey, great to have you on the Soybean School.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Now, Laura, we all know that summer and late season moisture is key for soybean success. But let's start this off with how soybeans have performed in the spring in Manitoba. You know, how have they done in recent years? And, you know, I know we can get some tough conditions, especially late frosts.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think in many ways, soybeans have really surprised us with their ability to handle some of these challenging spring conditions. I feel like recently we've had kind of all the flavors of spring. You know, it's been dry or wet. We've had early seeding or delayed with flooding. And even within those years, it's so much varied field to field on what kind of spring conditions those soybeans have been facing. But really kind of impressed with their ability. These late spring frosts, though, you mentioned, they're pretty tough. For the most part, though, last couple of years where they have occurred in those fields that they've hit, a lot of those soybeans were still safe below ground, so we weren't seeing too much for damage, and those plants were able to recover. So we have been pretty fortunate there. We've also had some challenges though with soil crusting. So these soybeans struggling to emerge through a soil crust layer, or even challenges in those dry springs with seeding soybeans too deep that they're really struggling to get up out of the ground from that depth. So we'll see some of those stress symptoms like yellowing and in the cotyledons and these swollen stems in those two kind of scenarios there. But I've really been impressed where once they're out of the ground, those soybeans can really just recover quickly. They can really take off. They have an amazing ability to really recover from some of these stressful spring conditions, provided that those kind of growing points are up out of the ground. And they're just really resilient.
Yeah. Unless when they're up and rolling. Hey, you know, we know that canola is being planted later, you know, into warmer soils to help it quickly grow through the flea beetle threat at cotyledon stage. You know, what's the potential for more growers to plant soybeans earlier, given that fact?
Oh, yeah. And so thinking about that, we've got some recent research on soybean seeding windows in Manitoba, which is really what I'm going to reference here. What it's been showing us is that soybean seeding window is pretty flexible in Manitoba, which is great news for this. So there have been two recent research studies evaluating these different seeding dates for soybeans across the province. One was led by Kristen McMillan. She's the NPSG U of M agronomist in residence. And the second was led by Dr. Ramona Moore at AFC Brandon. So results from both of those research projects are really showing us that soybeans can be successfully planted throughout the month of May, and occasionally we'll even see a bit of that yield bump from planting in the second week of May. However, when we start delaying seeding to that fourth week of May or later, that's when we're really starting to see reduced yield potential. And this is pretty consistent with MASC yield data over the years too. We're seeing greater yield potential for those first 3 weeks of May, and then it's quickly dropping off as we hit that 4th week of May or into June. My only hesitation around that first week of May, though, is that risk of that late spring frost you mentioned.
Yeah. So now we've decided that we can go a little earlier. If growers are going to plant soybeans early, what do they need to consider? Let's talk about planting dates and conditions. That can be tough to peg, but how early is too early, and what's the danger?
Okay, how early is too early? So a good rule of thumb for how early is too early, that would be to aim to seed within 2 weeks of your average last spring frost date for your region. So we've got this map here of some of that frost risk on average. So that's from Manitoba Agriculture weather data over the years. And then also next to that, we've got some of these symptoms you might see if those soybeans do get hit by one of those late spring frosts in that area. But if these soybeans are up and out of the ground and that frost occurs, there's a risk of injury. They can tolerate some cool air temperatures for a few hours if they've had a chance to harden first, but that risk remains from that spring frost. If the frost kills the plants below those cotyledons, like when they're at that hook stage just coming out of the ground, as those soybeans are emerging, those plants won't be able to recover. So that's important to consider. And we saw this with Kristen's research too with seeding dates. Those very early seeding windows in the first week of May, that was pretty risky, where late spring frost did occur in 2 years of her study. And this caused lowered plant stands, and it also even caused yield reductions in a few cases where those sites were hit by frost. So take a look at this map of your area's average date of last spring frost and aim to seed within 2 weeks of that. So those soybeans are still safe below ground when that hits, and they can emerge pretty quickly after that.
Laura, what about a thing like seed size? Is it a factor in toughness at planting?
Well, first of all, just using good quality seed is just going to start you off so much better than something where you're maybe not sure about the quality there. Just getting that crop off to a good, strong start. So actually, one of those studies, Dr. Moore's study at Brandon, also conducted some research recently to ask that question: do these seed-related factors influence the actual success of our soybean germination? So she was looking at all kinds of things, including seed size, but also the conditions that seed was grown under. So if you were growing that soybean seed under a drought, does that impact my next year's ability to succeed? Kind of stuff like that. And there was also a bunch of other factors. All of it really diving into how does that impact the germination speed at different temperatures, and she was doing that in a series of growth chamber studies. So we do want to do a little bit more into this in terms of taking that to the field, but from those growth chamber studies, ultimately, temperature, of course, had the biggest effect on germination. But what was interesting is as these soybeans were put into cooler and cooler conditions, it's a little bit more, tougher and tougher conditions, some of those seed quality factors started to have a bigger impact. So there, where seed size, for example, became more important was when it was cooler, where those larger seeds were generally a bit tougher and able to handle some of those cooler temperatures, which makes sense, right? You got a bit of a larger seed, it's going to have a few more resources it can draw on than that smaller seed. But ultimately, starting with good quality seed is really going to be an important factor to really establishing that strong crop.
For sure. Now, what about seeding rates? If we're planting early, what's the rate, and how does it change as spring moves along?
Soybean seeding rate's a hot topic, right? Because it's just so expensive, the seed that we're using. So at MPSG's On-Farm Network, we have hosted more than 100 soybean seeding rate trials because it's such an interesting thing to consider on our farms. And we've done that over the last 10 plus years. So from those trials, we are seeing a lot of flexibility in soybean seeding rates, more so than we would have originally expected. So we were seeing, seeding rates of 150 to 190,000 seeds per acre have maintained yield while minimizing those seed costs. But when we're thinking about seeding soybeans earlier into some of these tougher conditions, we do want to establish a strong crop. And we are putting them into a more challenging scenario in some of those cases. So in that instance, I think we want to stay on the upper side of that seeding rate range. We're not seeing that benefit of going above 190,000 seeds per acre in those scenarios, but we do want to stay on the upper end of that range. So we're still getting those ideal living plant stands of 140 to 160,000 live plants per acre. And that's really our target to maximize soybean yield in Manitoba. And then considering, as that spring progresses, in those late planting scenarios, there we're really considering the economics, of that seeding rate. Does it actually provide a return on investment to put the same number of seeds in the ground? And we're really not seeing that at those later seeding dates. Reduced yield potential with that later seeding date. We can reduce our seeding rate in response if we're planting later, just to make sure we're getting the economic return on investment to our farm.
Hey, final question for you, and that is, any advice for growers if conditions get rough after planting? Soybean fields can look pretty tough in the spring, but though if the weather cooperates, they can come through some difficult situations.
Yeah, exactly like you say. So I guess part of that is, remaining hopeful. But if you've got those fields where you're just not really sure, or you do want to kind of keep an eye on them, I would say, keep an eye on them. Monitor your living plant stand in those fields. Take out your hoop, take some plant counts. What do you actually see for potential in that field where you're concerned? Because these soybeans, they do have this amazing ability to compensate with branches later in the season. They'll really fill out, especially with newer varieties in recent years. We're seeing a lot of potential to really be adapted to our Manitoba conditions here. So if your plant stand's looking fairly even in the field, you're seeing a plant population above 120,000 plants per acre, there's a lot of potential there. You're within 90% of maximum yield potential based on the research that's been conducted here.
Well, what you just heard was a Soybean School episode. You can find more episodes of the Soybean School by going to soybeanschool.com or on the Real Agriculture YouTube page. It is brought to you by Ingenia Herbicide by BSF Canada and Syngenta Canada. Make sure you check out the new Pest and Predators podcast episodes that have been coming out. And it is brought to you by Field Heroes, powered by the Western Grains Research Foundation. Visit fieldheroes.ca to learn how beneficial insects can benefit your farm. We'll be back on RealAg Radio with the top ag news stories today, right after this. Get all the information you need to keep your pulse crop healthy and profitable with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School is a free YouTube video series covering agronomy, research, and more across a host of different pulse crops. It's also available as an audio podcast wherever you download or stream your favorite podcast. Check us out on YouTube or visit RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School, brought to you by BSF Canada.
I'm Lindsay Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomist, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomist with me, Lindsay Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
Let's find out what's going on in the world of news this week, or I guess today. The top ag news stories of the day here on Real Ag Radio is brought to you by Co-op. Co-op knows your community because we live here too. Our teams are your trusted partners with a range of expertise to help support your entire farm operation. Co-op, here for your farm, here for your family. Learn more at co-op.crs/farm. Okay, top ag news stories of the day. Up first, wanted to mention a story in the Globe and Mail. The European Union, Canada, Japan, and climate-vulnerable Pacific Island states are among 47 countries rallying support for a charge on the international shipping sector's greenhouse gas emissions. Now, this was a story unveiled by Reuters. The documents being discussed at an International Maritime Organization meeting, now entering a second week, outlined 4 proposals with a combined 47 backers for imposing a fee on each ton of greenhouse gas the industry produces. Support for the idea has more than doubled from the 20 nations that publicly supported a carbon levy at the French Climate Finance Summit last year. Backers argue the policy could raise more than $80 billion a year in funding, which could be reinvested to develop low-carbon shipping fuels and support poor countries to transition. Opponents, including China and Brazil, say it would penalize trade-reliant emerging economies. Okay. China and Brazil are actually pointing out here what my first reaction to this story was. with the amount of exports that Canada relies on from a GDP perspective, I want someone to explain why we are one of the big proponents of this. Brazil and China are probably asking good questions here. Story finishes by saying those countries are competing to win over the dozens of others, including most African nations that diplomats say have yet to take a firm stance on the issue. The IMO takes decisions by consensus, but can also do so by majority support. Now, we've heard Canada's reaction to the Product USA final rule that Tom Vilsack, USDA Secretary, put out last week. Well, Mexico has now spoken up, and they are warning of potential challenges under the USMCA or WTO. The new rule would require meat, poultry, and egg products labeled Products USA to be entirely sourced and processed in the United States. Mexico and Canada criticize the rule, fearing negative impacts on their exports. Mexico, a supplier of beef to the U.S., argues that the rule undermines regional trade integration and may lead to disruptions in supply chains. The Mexican government is urging the U.S. to reconsider the rule and emphasizes its commitment to resolving differences through dialogue, but hints at potential legal action if necessary. Also, former President Trump threatened to impose 100% tariffs on cars manufactured in Mexico by Chinese companies, doubling the previous proposed levy on automobiles made in Mexico. He directed this threat at Chinese President Xi Jinping during a rally in Ohio, stating that every car crossing the border would face the tariff. Trump emphasized the potential consequences if he were not to win the upcoming U.S. presidential election, describing it as a bloodbath, referring to the economic issues related to not dealing with this nearshoring that China is doing in Mexico. Now, we're still waiting on the SAF details in the U.S. There's week 2 of that. USDA Secretary Tom Vilsack at the Commodity Classic in Houston said it would be weeks, not months, when detailed information comes out regarding the Sustainable Aviation Fuel Program after the initial March 1st date was not met. Now, there was some talk about there being some sustainability measures tied to this GREET model. Farmers who can prove their carbon intensity is lower than the standard for corn or soybeans may qualify for a premium from their ethanol biofuels plant, but GREET alone won't secure corn ethanol's future in SAF. Ethanol producers need to shave off more CI points, says Lauren Lurkins, a strategist from Bloomington, Illinois. Today, GREET says corn ethanol has 43% less emissions of greenhouse gas than petroleum-based jet fuel. That must increase to 50% to unlock SAF tax credits. The Saskatchewan government is committing $50 million in funding over 5 years to the Global Institute for Food Security at the University of Saskatchewan. The money will enable collaboration with partners on our market-facing programs, including accelerated breeding, biomanufacturing, and policy and regulatory, maximizing Saskatchewan and Canada's sustainability production of safe and nutritious food for a growing world, says GIF's CEO Stephen Webb. The province will be allocating $3 million to the Institute annually from 23 through 27. Also, Grain Fox, a subsidiary of FarmLink Marketing Solutions based out of Winnipeg, has announced its entry to the U.S. market via a partnership with Chicago-based market advisory firm AgResource. Grain Fox offers data management and grain marketing expertise from bin to bank through its online platform. AgResource offers international market analysis for its customers. So, big collaboration there as Grain Fox enters the U.S. market. Of course, we talked to Neil Townsend from Grain Fox regularly here on this program. You know, we were talking about trade there a little bit earlier, and this Product USA labeling issue that Canada and Mexico are now fighting with the U.S., it's a good example of kind of the scope creep that happened and the original intentions to change that Product of USA label we talked about last week. But it also is a little bit of a forecasting to what is ahead here when it comes to some, Canada and the U.S. trying to, and Mexico trying to have this collaboration in the USMCA agreement, but still just continue to find reasons to not have the level of integration that is possible. So that's going to be, there's more to come on that front indeed. If you have any feedback, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Thanks so much for everybody for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio.
Thank you for downloading this episode of the RealAg Radio podcast, brought to you by Barricade 2 herbicide from FMC. Use Barricade 2 herbicide for consistent, powerful control of the toughest in-crop weeds without harming your wheat, oats, or barley crop. Barricade 2 herbicide, tough on weeds, gentle on crops.